Welcome back to Unconditional Surrender. I think this is part 4 now. Probably an opportune time to do a quick summary because I've just finished the first summer of 41. So Barbarossa is done. There's been a few deviations from what you might call a normal game, if there is such a thing in Unconditional Surrender, in that there's been no a Mediterranean front because Italy just didn't get into the war. So I want to push on through it to see what is the impact of that in the long term, because ultimately it keeps the southern front secure for the Germans unless the Allies declare war on Italy. Is that necessary? I don't know. So Germany invaded Russia in June. There was a chance of good weather in May, which they didn't get, so they went in June. So they've done June, July, August and September, all which are good weather, so they've had 4 turns of good weather. But what you find is that you don't have sufficient production points to be active along the entire front, because you're forever mindful of your aircraft status, trying to keep the sorties down to something sensible. And what I've found is that they're lagging behind the front line, and the Russian air were able to be sufficiently far back to be able to oppose quite a few of the forward thrusts of the German army. They're adjacent to Leningrad. They've got Bryansk. They're still way short of Moscow. The air's just starting to build up, but as a counterpoint to the attack in the east, the British have invaded France, which I think the jury's still out on that, but I felt that it's forcing the Germans to spend some of their precious production points having to react to what's going on in France, to take it away from their stock of action points effectively, which they would much rather spend on the Eastern Front. So the Allies invaded Le Havre successfully. It's a bit of a one-shot. They've only got one surprise marker, and they won't have enough production to buy that back. But given that you've got air superiority, naval bombardment, there weren't sufficient German aircraft to intercept or to try and support the ground forces, so they got ashore. But of course the problem that they have is that they only really have at this stage of the war 2 useful field units: the WDF, which is now not required in the desert, and the BEF. So very difficult for them to push inland because they're going to leave themselves exposed. They can't really afford to ship across a garrison unit to garrison the port in France, because that will mean that that's going to be very vulnerable to an attack by the Germans, which would just cut them off. So I think you can just get you can get a foothold, and then they're now relying essentially on the poorer weather to limit German counterattacks, because the Germans will probably do a strategic movement of a panzer army back to France, which is obviously good for the Russians, and that will give them some potential to try and throw the British out of France before the other field units arrive in the summer. There's an American task force which arrives, and I think there's a British armoured unit. I got a bit confused because there is an American tank chit which arrives in December of 41, but the task force only arrives like 6 months later. I thought, what's the point of that chit? But I think I've managed to answer my own question in that air units can only support the same nationality. So British Air, British ground units, American Air, American ground units. But I think the chits have to be the same faction. So I think that represents sort of lend-lease of tanks to support the British before the first actual American ground forces arrive. The other slight problem they've got is that the strategic warfare, they're on the back foot really, because the British have only got, well, they've got nothing in apart from Ultra. They've got a few Ultra chits that start to turn up soon, but the Germans have the upper hand with an air unit in Stavanger and the port of Brest for their U-boats. So I think the British lost factories are on about 4 or 5, so they're typically getting sort of 16 production points a turn, so never able to rebuild their surprise marker, but sufficient to keep the convoy in Le Havre with enough sorties to supply those units that are ashore. So that's all well and good. And as regards my sort of satisfaction on the progress of the Germans, they're probably behind the curve, aren't they? Most of these games you think you're doing great, you're moving east, but on reflection you've never moved east fast enough. So they are struggling a little bit with having enough points. Capturing Leningrad would be a big bonus for them, obviously, but whether that's possible, because it's a fort, can only be assaulted, so it's a one-shot thing. Need to check the rules on, I think Leningrad is its own source of supply, need to check the rules on that. But yeah, that's going to be a bit tricky. But anyway, the game is still a great game. I mean, I wish I could play it more face to face really. Probably expose some of my weakness in playing, but of course when you're playing both sides it doesn't really matter. Maybe the poor play cancels each other out. Anyway, let's have a look at the map. We are in France. You'll see this is as far as the bridge has got, and the problem that the British have is if they move further inland, that's going to expose their supply source. There are 3 German field armies. They have to have 3 in the west to comply with the garrison policy. They've actually got another one up in Stavanger. Maybe that should be shipped across to Russia now. So a bit of a stalemate there, I think. But if the Allies can hang on and for the summer and not get chucked out by any Germans that arrive from the east, that might give them a good jumping off point. We'll see. So nothing happening in the Med, nothing to see, just all very, very quiet. And then the Eastern Front in the south, pushing up to Dnipropetrovsk. You can see Rostov is some way away. There's Kharkov, not really doing much in the middle. A couple of Panzer armies. There's a chance of good weather next turn, but it's only a 1 in 6, I think. And if you get it in October, you'll definitely get nothing decent in November. The best they've done really is up in the north, where they are adjacent to Leningrad. You see that their aircraft are quite removed from the front line. They're starting to get, this one down here is actually fresh, so they might be able to push on a bit around the juniper in October. But it's all good fun. I'm enjoying it. Till later.